welcome everyone. I know everyone's still joining. I see a lot of people joining. This is going to be really fun. My name is Amanda Royal. I write Earth Hope, which collects environmental success stories from around the world to inspire action. And I am joined today with the incredible Sam Matey-Coste from Paris. And he writes the weekly Anthropocene and your daily dose of climate hope. Also, a great newsletter to see environmental progress, environmental success stories weekly on Wednesdays. You're much more consistent than I am. And you'd think that we do very similar work, but it rarely overlaps that much. And that is just a testament to how much good news there is out there. And when we do, I feel like there's a little bit like, oh, he beat me to it.
It doesn't work that way, Good, think about how much bad news is covered. Think about how every horrible thing that happens in the world is covered by 200 different outlets, and a lot of good news is barely covered. So there's some other folks in the space. Angus Holvey on Substack with Fix the News. He's spectacular. Yeah. I feel like it's great when more people are getting their own takes on the many, many really positive things happening in the world. So, building that ecosystem of folks sharing some of the really spectacular stuff going on in the world that doesn't get reported nearly as much as the horrible abuses happening in the world.
So it really doesn't matter if they read it twice. They read it once with yours and once with mine, and maybe it'll sink in. They'll click on the story and actually read it and think of all those beautiful people that made that success story happen. That's what I want people to think about. I want them to read this and know how capable they are of doing and affecting this change themselves. So we're here to talk about China today because you just got back from a 10-day tour of China, and I wanted to tap that enthusiasm right away and see, and learn exactly what you learned there. You've done a ton of research. You know a lot of Chinese history. I'm rusty at it compared to you based on my reading of your writing. And I think what we really want to try to tackle today is why, we were talking about this before we started. China
Why is China things?
What's that?
Why is China kicking our butt at so many things? Why does China taking the U.S. in so many different categories in the last 10 years?
Right. Thanks for the wording. And I'm hoping to go point by point. We can do some high level stuff, but point by point, the really top things are energy, transportation. I don't think it's beating us at biodiversity right now, but energy and transportation, they're doing a ton on biodiversity with their national parks. And that overall is really, it's something that the U.S. can look at and say, wow, how can we keep up with this? I think it's really a challenge that we should look at and face. You said before this started, that you thought it hasn't really penetrated enough to people that the U.S. is in a self-inflicted electricity crisis.
Entirely self-inflicted. Yeah, entirely. Yeah. In many countries, in many countries, electricity prices are decreasing. In Australia, they're starting a program for 3 hours of free electricity every day. There's so much solar power on the grid. There's increasingly zero electricity price days on spot markets in the European Union. In China, data centers are viewed as a helpful sink for the excess electricity being generated by clean energy. It is 100% a political problem and the fault of sort of politics and civil society that electricity bills are going up in the United States. It is not a technological problem. Most of the world is seeing electricity get much more accessible very fast.
So just in California, and I pay at peak times 65 cents per kilowatt hour plus another 10 to 20 cents for transmission. That's inching up to being $1 per kilowatt hour. And I've got these panels in my back cranking out electricity, covert panels. PG&E hasn't caught me yet. They're going to pay themselves in 3 years because of that. Because it's so expensive,
Rooftop solar in Australia is about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So 1/3 of what you'll pay.
So let's focus on China.
Yeah.
Let's go first to energy, and what they're achieving over there with energy. I know solar makes up now 13% of their entire grid. Let's hear you tell us, like, everything you know about what they're doing there.
So I'm just going to share my screen a little bit and walk through some of the articles I published recently because they conveniently have a lot of graphics in one place that
Yeah.
illustrate what I would like to talk about. And to do that, I'm going to need to figure out how to share my screen on a Substack Live, which I've never done before. So I should not have just confidently said that. I should have figured out how to do that and then brought it up subtly in the conversation.
This is an
Uh,
experiment. Sorry,
yeah,
everyone, we're experimenting on you. There you go.
no,
And I
don't.
also don't know how to see, questions in the chat. I see a lot of people have joined, but I don't know how to see, if anybody's written a question. I'm
Okay.
sorry about that.
So, so it is hard to overstate the level to which China has changed within living memory. Like, is as recently as like the 1950s, when the People's Republic of China was still already in power when Mao had control. Much of China was as poor as sub-Saharan Africa is today. We had levels of extreme poverty worsened by some truly catastrophic policy decisions that led to the Great Chinese Famine, part of the quote unquote Great Leap Forward in the late 50s, which caused millions of people to die due to attempts to centralize agriculture combined with floods and a bunch of other issues. Um, so akin to maybe like it's tough to analogize, but, like, in living standards, certainly, if not in history, akin to, like, the Democratic Republic of Congo today, an extremely poor country in which millions of people might die and not much of the world and much of the world might not even hear much about it. A place of where living standards were extremely low and there was immense human suffering. And since the reform and opening up movement of Deng Xiaoping after Mao's, uh, unlamented death in the mid-1970s, um, China has developed at a rate that is really staggering to contemplate. And, this has we kind of speed running in a way big chunks of sort of the 1800s and 1900s history in North America and Europe with all of its good and bad parts, from like mass pollution to mass uplift in living standards to change social norms. And and lately for a lot of the early decades of this, the 80s, the 1990s, the 2000s, a lot of this was sort of fossil fuel power, like most development on Earth had historically been. China
Right.
built vast infrastructure of coal plants, got terrible smog as it started to move from bicycles to cars, got sort of stuff patterns we've seen many other places, but on a much bigger scale because it's China and it's 1/7 of humanity. It's immense. Um, and then there's a great book, Climate Capitalism, by Akshat Rathi from Bloomberg, that discusses the backstory behind this. Starting in large part in the year when I was born, when an engineer called Wang Gang made a really convincing PowerPoint presentation to the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee about the value of battery technology. Like, probably maybe the single person who's done the most to fight climate change on the planet, just a Chinese technocrat. Very few people know his name. Since that presentation, China's been investing heavily in electrotech, solar power, wind turbine, and battery research and development, and that has sort of compounded over time and just started to give truly incredible returns. So a lot of China's development these days is powered by clean energy, and that has led to, in absolute terms, a lot more electricity being generated in China than in any other country in the world. I wish I could share my screen right now. Is there a um? Do you have any idea? Because I don't know. Okay,
Um,
but
but as you spoke.
saying or found in my articles that I linked to, the China Chronicles on the Weekly Anthropocene. So China overtook the total amount of electricity generation of the United States. That's all in one country versus all in another country, not per person, around 2010, and now it's closing in on like 3 times as much total electricity generation as the United States. The graph looks like the United States going like this, and then China like going like this, just a rapid, massive overtake. Um, China China last year in 2025 had the highest single year electricity consumption of any nation in world history. And a lot of that, like most of the new stuff coming online in China right now, is renewable energy. In the first half of 2025, China installed 256 gigawatts, 256,000 megawatts of solar power, which is 67% of all solar power built in the world in those 6 months, twice as much new solar as the rest of the world combined. And that's actually underselling it because a lot of that remaining 43% was solar panels being put up in the rest of the world that were made in China. China makes about 80% of the world's solar panels. And actually, that's underselling it because a lot of the remaining 20% solar panels made in factories outside China is made by Chinese companies opening factories in other countries, like in Indonesia or Hungary or
Right.
Latin America. Like, how a McDonald's in Shanghai or anywhere else is an American company operating in another country, or a Ford plant in another country. There was a report in 2025 that China's external investment in clean energy manufacturing, that 20%, not that 80%, now amounts to more than the inflation-adjusted dollar value of the Marshall Plan, the America's investment to rebuild Europe after World War II. So China's making 80% of all the world's solar panels, and the amount of money it's investing in the remaining 20% of solar panels, plus a bunch of closely related fields like electrotech fields like EVs and batteries, is equivalent to the Marshall Plan. So it's just a shocking total predominance of what is rapidly becoming sort of central to civilization. The set of technologies that gather free electricity from the sun, store that electricity in batteries, and just allow you to electrify your entire civilization with get much higher energy efficiency, get much lower air pollution. I'm sorry, am I monologuing? I monologue a lot. Okay.
I think it's great. I think it's important. What I'm thinking when you're telling us all this, is it's important to remember why you would deploy this much energy. As your talk with Hannah Ritchie last week pointed out, you need energy to solve poverty. You
Yeah.
absolutely need energy to solve poverty. And when you solve poverty, when you've solved these basic things, then you actually can afford to invest in environmental protection, restoration, conservation. That's why economists consider the environment a luxury good. So you
Which it
in
isn't, but that's how people treat it. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not that China's doing this because of, I mean, it does care and its people care about the environment. But it is absolutely doing it out of necessity and out of an understanding of the economics. They're going to deploy the cheapest thing that is available, and they're going to do it. And when they decide to do this stuff, they get it done. That's my observation of China. When they make a decision to do something, they get it done. We never said our caveat.
I was about to say, now's a good moment for the caveat. We do
Okay.
not accept the Chinese Communist Party and all the hideous evil dictatorship they do. We are not trying to do propaganda. We are trying to point out that a non-democratic country is now doing all this really impressive technological and climate stuff. I'm not going to say we. I personally do not like the horrible, horrible oppression and internment of the Uyghurs, the repeated attempts to invade the free democracy of Taiwan, the disappearing people like tennis star Peng Shuai after she accused the Communist Party official of sexual assault, the longstanding oppression of Tibet, the many other horrible things the Chinese government does. But what I'm trying to talk about here is that this is almost like Ember, a really great think tank, analogizes the electric revolution to the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, just a big upshift. Like this is almost like no matter what you think of the leadership of like a particular village in the Fertile Crescent in like 8000 BC, the end of the Neolithic, it is really important to notice if one village has started adopting farming at scale when the other ones are still hunting like migrating ibex herds. It is really important to notice when one jurisdiction is doing something in a radically different way with big implications for humanity, even if they're also doing other horrible things. You can't just wish away the fact that China is way, way ahead of us on some of the central technologies of the world right now.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And as we discussed, before we launched, and this is becoming clear in America as well, a people are not ever the equivalent of their government, and that is always, I know China in a very intimate way. For people who don't know this, my parents and uh, the four of us were among the first 100 Americans to re-enter the country in 1979. We literally were on a plane to China when Deng Xiaoping and Carter were signing the opening of relations. So, I know intimately, um, all the a lot of you can find the same people in China that you find anywhere else, right? And we can divide the government from what is happening. That's our caveat here, right, for this
As
discussion.
an American citizen right now, I really hope we can divide people from their government. So, I really don't want to be judged based on the monsters in the White House right now who are doing their own evil stuff. So, yes, like when we talk about China, we're also talking about the engineers, the scientists, the hardworking parents, like the literal billions of people who have built this extraordinary efflorescence of technological modernity that is modern China's infrastructure.
Yeah. So all eyes are on China for a lot of, the environmental issues that we have in the world, and particularly climate change. And I think in one of your articles, you really point out that it in some ways it's up to China to make the moves to solve our climate change issues. Their emissions peaked in 2023, as far as I know. Their
I think
carbon
from the sector, yeah, I think from the electricity sector, yeah, there's still some land use stuff. They're at the very least all emissions are at the very least close to peaking, and emissions have been plateauing in the weeds. Broad strokes, correct. Yes, yeah,
and I'll reframe what I just said. A lot of countries can do a lot on climate change. If China does nothing, we can't solve it.
yeah. Like they will,
But fortunately, China's not doing nothing. Right?
yeah.
And the US obviously needs to do more.
I always say like when I what read and write about China's accomplishments, which I'm doing a lot. Um, I just saw the live chat. Someone saying testing if you can read this, so I can read this. Um,
Yep.
uh, but but I'm always, a little upset as an American, but really glad as a human. It would be great if America was doing this, if we were the workshop of the Industrial Revolution, building solar panels around the world. And some of the people on Kamala Harris's team wanted us to get more into that game, talked about a green Marshall Plan of building electrotech for the rest of the world to help the rest of the world. Biden and the ridiculously underrated Inflation Reduction Act invested hugely in standing up an American clean energy manufacturing ecosystem, much of which has now been severely damaged in the last year. Um, but the point is, like you said, someone needs to do this, and right now, all an overwhelming majority of all the stuff that we need to get ourselves out of this to replace fossil fuels to run civilization on clean electrons is made in China. And if China had never had the reform in opening up, if it was still a Maoist like giant sized North Korea, we'd all be totally screwed. Like, yeah, or maybe there would have been ripple effects, and the U.S. would have done more clean energy in the absence of China. Who knows? But like, y- but like, it is really immensely good for the world that China is making this huge amount of clean energy technology.
Yeah. Great. Okay, tell us about the grid. How is their grid different from our grid or in the US? And what could we be doing to match their innovation?
The big difference in the with the grid in between China and the U.S. specifically, this could be sort of a snarky remark, but is that they actually build one. A lot of the U.S. grid, a lot of the U.S. grid is based on decades old infrastructure, sometimes from like 1930s Roosevelt era programs, and China has built a huge chunk of its grid to much more sort of modern standards just in the last few decades. Like, I'm gonna forget the exact statistics, but I believe in well, recent year where there were statistics from both countries, 2022, China built 80 times more lines of more power lines, more miles of power lines than the US, 80 times. And China's roughly the same size as the US in terms of in terms of geographical size. And it's bigger than the US in population, but not 80 times bigger. And and a lot of and furthermore, they're using a lot of technologies that are only really just barely getting a toehold in the US, like really long distance direct current DC transmission lines, which allow electricity to be carried much, much longer and converted into the more usable AC form at the end user, not right where it's generated. So it's I juxtaposed in my article the Chinese supergrid with the Great Wall of China because that classic sort of icon of history and landscapes was meant to defend against the physical threat of steppe invaders from the Qin dynasty defending against the Xiongnu in like the 220s BC to the Ming dynasty defending against the Mongols in the 1400s CE. And we're increasingly in China, we're getting many, like thousands of kilometers long power lines from solar panels and wind farms out in sort of the lower population density periphery, like Inner Mongolia, Gansu, occupied territories like Xinjiang, that is bringing a lot of electricity from those solar panels and wind turbines to the more higher population density areas of China, sort of traditional historic China, um, closer to the coast. So we've got just this. So it's these. It's like there's a new power line. There's a new power line being built right now that is the equivalent of bringing a substantial chunk of Washington D.C.'s electricity in from Idaho, like solar farms way out in the desert, going all the way across the country to power a big chunk of Guangzhou, the Pearl River Delta region, and that is like if we said, okay, we're building tons of solar in like Montana, and that will be powering Philadelphia, and it just happened, and that
Right.
actually, and there were dozens of like projects of that scale, and in the U.S., meanwhile, like it is a really deeply dispiriting struggle to get anything built at all. The book Abundance is about this a lot, and in the clean energy space in particular, like there are both on the left and the right people who will oppose any clean energy infrastructure with a truly extraordinary degree of vehemence, even when the available data doesn't really seem to show there's any negative impact. Like I totally get, like I sort of came up in the environmental movement tradition. There was a long tradition of opposing bad stuff that can cause serious harm, like tar sands pipelines. But electricity transmission lines, power lines, have much lower impacts. There's some issues where like bulbs can electrify themselves on them and stuff, but those can be engineered around with different spacing. They do not leak pollution. They don't poison air, soil, or water. They are in fact reducing air pollution immensely by bringing in power that can be used to electrify heating and EVs and all sorts of stuff and prevent fossil fuel boiling. Prevent
Right.
fossil. So and again, cut me off if I'm monologuing too much. I know
I'm curious about, because I don't understand this stuff closely enough myself, but it sounds like you do. What is the efficiency gain that it's gained by the different currents? Isn't there an efficiency gain? And weren't we also trying to modernize our grid as part of some negotiations last year? And
yes.
unfortunately, the environmental camp in America can't agree on a lot of things. So that we didn't get that done because we basically wouldn't compromise.
You're sort of touching on permitting reform there, which is a topic dear to my heart. And we did a caveat for the Chinese regime, going to do a caveat for the American regime. It may seem ridiculously like fratricidal and pointless to be criticizing like nuances of sort of environmental policy when there's mass secret police on the streets, and the evil shit being done under the current White House is evil shit. But I personally think that, sorry if I'm being too frank, but or being too cutting Amanda. But uh but but I think a lot of the reason the Democrats lost the White House in 2024 is that the big investment in clean energy technology did not pan out in as much of a transformation as it should have. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that spending lots of money on clean energy in America sometimes leads to not a lot getting built due to these issues we're talking about, these differences between these sort of nerdy issues like permitting reform. So this is really quite important. My review of the book
Right.
about a lot more discussion of my view on how this works in this political moment.
Right. And you wrote a review of the book Abundance that went into a lot of detail on your thoughts about it, but there is basically so I think if we're asking the question, why can China do this so fast? Why is it able to just crank this stuff out so fast? And this is absolutely environmental progress. There's no doubt about it. And it has to be done. And it has to be done to save the world, not just provide electricity for China. Um, and then
Well,
you look at America and you say, well, why can't we do this? Why? What? And one of the answers is that we do have too many environmental regulations. You and I think, are both centrists on this. I'm very
Honestly,
in
myself a
energy.
very much liberal, very much on the left, but right now, environmental regulations are net harmful to environmental progress in a lot of regions,
Thank
which is hard to because fundamentally the marginal thing being built these days is a big improvement on the fossil fuel power thing that it's replacing. So that's the big shift that the thing is. I really don't see myself as centrist per se. It sort of is a centrist coded thing to talk about voting reform, but I think that fundamentally it is a really important thing for any kind of functional left or liberalism to get to actually be able to build stuff with government money. So,
Right.
um,
And I live in California. I really, really want to be able to go to Los Angeles in 2 hours. I
yeah, and
really, really badly want to do that, and I can't.
since California has failed to build a high-speed rail system, one line for like 15 years, and in that time, those same 15 years, China has built an incredible nationwide high-speed rail system. Like
Okay,
literally,
let's transition to that because that is so
well,
fun,
I,
and that
I want to
is
make a point on the permitting reform pulse.
okay.
You asked why the U.S. can't build things. I just put a ProPublica article in there. One reason why the US can't build things, and naming and shaming is a bit rude, but I think necessary here, is people like Eileen Gilbert. Eileen Gilbert is a random 76-year-old retiree in Oregon who has personally shut down a huge amount of clean energy infrastructure projects, including power line, by filing lawsuits under the National Environmental Policy Act and a state level environmental review act.
Right.
So this is just a, a random person who
Yeah.
has managed to seriously screw up an entire state's grid due to environmental regulations that were intended to protect the environment, but now in this practice have been completely expanded to the point where one person can literally screw it up for everybody. There's a
And
similar
that
case
was
on the East
uh,
Coast, the guy called David who has filed so many objections to offshore wind farms that they've been picked up by the fossil fuel lobby and the fossil fuel lobby and now the Trump administration, literal individual people with lots of money and time on their hands, David Stevenson and Eileen Gilbert, and they'll just and these are people who we might like in person. These are like retirees who are just hanging out and living a normal life. They're not like evil oligarchs or something. Um, Individual people can file lawsuits that can screw up entire states' grids.
right.
That is a big part of why the U.S. cannot build the stuff to the extent that China's doing it.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's true for now, first of all, environmental litigation, and I feel like we always have to caveat ourselves. Environmental litigation is the source of a lot of progress and why we have certain species still left on Earth here in America.
And
I
and when I talk about environmental litigation being a bad thing in this context, I'm talking about a very specific subset of it. The
yeah,
overwhelming majority of currently U.S. environmental law, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Superfund Act,
yeah,
I think is absolutely spectacular and much needed and got us out of a horrible muck and mire of terrible water and air pollution in the mid
right,
20th century. I'm talking about the very specific subset of of sort of open-ended environmental review, like NEPA and a bunch of state-level stuff, like SECA, the California version,
CEQA,
that really allows anyone to sue anything at any time for any reason, and
right,
intended to be like a lifeline for people who wanted to object to a project but won't cover by any of the existing things, a people's shield of last resort. But it's become literally like lit- but it has outgrown what the original intent of the law to a degree where it is literally a button that anyone who can afford to file a lawsuit can press to stop anything.
right.
And increasingly, what it's stopping, what this law intended to prevent the environment was stopping, what it's stopping is clean energy. Like this process in the US is keeping lots of fossil fuel burning because we because people can now hold up solar farms and power lines and offshore wind farms with lawsuits under a law intended to protect the environment. The
Right.
polarity reversed on the impact of this. And these things like solar farms, sorry, but like solar farms, power lines, offshore wind turbines, they would not cause problems under the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act or Endangered Species Act or any of those. They People are suing based on this stuff like aesthetic impact, like
Yeah.
incompatibility with traditional character of the land, this crazy abstract stuff that that would not trigger like what I would consider to be an actual real environmental issue, but is sort of a level by which people can slow down projects.
So here's my concern. Here's an example that represents my concern about these things. in California. Um, a student housing project, a dormitory basically, was sued at the University of California, Berkeley. And it was based on CEQA, and the reasoning was the environmental pollution would be the noise that the students created.
The students' pollution ruling, that was called. Like, literally,
So,
the lawsuit defined, like, the presence of students and their voices as a form of pollution. Yeah.
so here's my concern, and I think it does. It is. It does affect. It is a. This example is applicable to the rest of the country. When we push too hard for things, we actually lose things, right? When we push that hard or we manipulate the system that much, we lose out, right? And in that case, when the Supreme Court ruled that the California Supreme Court ruled that yes, that was a legitimate reason to sue and stop that project. The very next day, the California legislature voted to exempt the University of California education system from CEQA. So the net effect of that lawsuit was a weakening of the environmental laws in California because they had pushed too far. They bargained for too much. And we allowed some random, it is a random dude who launched that lawsuit. And I think that's the case on a nationwide level. We need. I don't want to go into my lecture about this. I'm going to stay on track, but we do need to realize when we hear bargaining for too much.
Yeah, and it's not even too much. Like, I think the overwhelming majority of people who support environmental regulations and who voted for that specific law did not, in fact, want to let people sue against student housing as a form of pollution. It's this weird, like, rules loyal hack that this mass loophole that allows individual people to screw things up for everyone. Like, that is not even something the environmental movement per se is pushing for. It's this weaponization of existing law. It's sort of, even though no one really likes it, gets de facto defended because people generally want to defend environmental regulations. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like
So
that.
let's go.
Yeah.
I want to switch all the way back to China
Okay.
because
Yeah. Sorry, talking too
we
much.
were talking about high speed rail. We talked about why I can't travel to LA in 2 hours. And I really feel like I just want to enjoy the culture of LA a little bit more than I do. When I was a student in China in '96, I took a train. There were slow trains and fast trains back then. They took, you had the option because some of the trains stopped and the other trains didn't stop. So you wanted to get on the fast train. And I think it took me like a day and a half to get to Chongqing. I think, to get to Sichuan. And we were on that train for days, and my entire trip around China took 3 weeks. So you went around China on a high-speed train in 10 days.
I went from Beijing to Sichuan in 7 hours. There was a little QR code on the side of the seat where you could order food. There was like, it was more comfortable and more spacious than a plane. It had free Wi-Fi. Like, it was, yes, it has immensely transformed since then. It's almost like a city subway map. The entire country is like the New York subway system or something, where there's just stops and you can just get on there without even really thinking about it. And like the thing that really stuck with people from that article I wrote about Chinese high speed rail is I was street to seat in 10 minutes. Like, I walked through security, a much sort of lighter version of airport security. Didn't have to take your shoes off, just sort of walk through a scanner and put your bag through on a conveyor belt. Um, I already had purchased a ticket online, and I just walked through security, scanned the ticket twice, and was in my train seat. Literally, you just
Right.
walk off the street. And and yeah, as someone just pointed out, we own a dictatorship. If laws give people standing to sue, they do show. Laws must be altered to restrict standing. Yeah, I'm not arguing that, like, the renewables commissar should say you're no longer allowed to sue over things. I'm saying we should change the law. Like, I've been arguing about permitting reform, and arguing for permitting reform, for years now. I wrote an article about it, really urging the environmental movement to support a compromise permitting reform effort in 2024, that if it had passed would have really put us in a better situation than where we are today. But but I'm just addressing that in the moment. But yes, I
Yeah.
would like to change the law to make it much easier to build clean energy projects specifically in America. Um, but back to what I was saying, like, yeah, it was an incredibly convenient and easy transportation system and an electric one. Very low emission, high speed rail, highly efficient. The Fuxing electric train model that is powered by that supergrid.
And it's powered by the supergrid. I love that.
Yeah.
So, com do you have a notion of how many miles of high-speed rail there are in China? When did they start, and how quickly did they deploy this high-speed rail? I'm guessing
It is
it's about the time that we've been talking about high-speed rail in California.
China's
That
yeah, yeah. China's very full high-speed rail line began operations in 2008 for the Beijing Olympics,
Okay,
and by December 2025, so 17 years later,
17 years.
and its high-speed rail network surpassed 50,000 kilometers. The circumference of the planet Earth is 40,000 kilometers. China has built enough electric superfast train tracks since 2008 to wrap all the way around the equator and then some, in which time California has failed to build one high-speed rail line. That's kind of what we're talking about when we say something is seriously wrong in how the US builds things.
Yeah, and for people who read my Substack, I write so much about California's environmental progress, so much about its success stories. There's a lot that we do
Yeah,
correctly. There's a lot that, there's a lot of great things
yeah,
going on in the US, in California. You've got to read Sam's Substack and mine. We have dozens of examples, but like
yeah.
almost every week. So this is not all criticism, but it's really, I think, just a great exercise in understanding how can we make more progress in the US. Um, and look at this country that's actually, uh, doing this.
Like at this
I
point,
I
Indonesia and Tanzania are starting to build high-speed rail systems on the Chinese model with those electric trains faster than the US is. Like
yeah,
it is kind of getting more and more embarrassing with time.
right. Okay. Um, I wanna there's a ton of people joining, maybe leaving, a lot of people writing questions. Yes, the video will be available later. I think there's a recording that's sent out. Unfortunately, when we do these things, there's a lot of emails that are sent. There's a way for you to unsubscribe from the notifications. If you like these Substack Live videos, you can go in your settings and unsubscribe from all the massive notifications they send out, but there will be a recording sent out automatically after this is done. Um, and once again, we're talking about, it's me. I write Earth Hope, Amanda Royal, and there is Sam Matey-Coste. He's in Paris. I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, and we're talking about his latest trip to China, and all the advancements that China is making. I would love to make sure to get to electric vehicles, flying cars,
Yeah.
Shenzhen solar punk, not to mention pandas. Gosh, there's a lot still to
Why?
consider. Um, I think and there's also some big picture stuff that you say in your articles that I really encourage people to go to the weekly Anthropocene Substack, read the China Chronicles, sit down and just do it for an evening. Sam's got a lot of history, a lot of perspective, a lot of research, and then just these really quirky observations every once in a while that are just very entertaining and amusing. And for somebody who loves China, I just love reading this stuff. um,
And one other thing, like when we're talking about people, everyone in China was just incredibly nice to me. People very rarely see sort of foreign tourists in China these days, and also just due to the super high population, even where there are foreign tourists, they're a really small minority of the population in any given site, even in famous areas. And people were excited to see a foreigner and say, "Hi, how do you like China? Is this your first time here?" Like people were friendly and welcoming. A random dude in my hotel room when there was no one at the check-in counter to give me a room key, like, called the number for me because my phone was out of battery and invited me to hang out with his family, but he didn't speak a word of English. Invited me to hang out with his family in their hotel room while I was waiting for someone to give me the room key to my hotel room.
yeah.
A random family invited me to share their table at a restaurant for lunch and just talk about China and America. Like you said, like people are people everywhere, and people in and pretty much everyone I ever met in China was just super kind to me.
My
Yeah.
interpretation of that is because I experienced that as well when I have traveled alone in Taiwan. My interpretation of that is it really underscores to me how America is a very individualistic culture. We kind of celebrate people like going off on their own, like hiking in, mountains by themselves and, being self sufficient. And, we're constantly focused on individual kind of accomplishment. And Chinese culture to me is a lot more group oriented. And they cannot, in my experience, they can barely stand seeing somebody alone. Like it is unhealthy to them that you should be alone and you must be brought in and fed and and cared for and uh
I actually I'm not I totally I totally buy that that's what I totally believe that's what you experienced, but I feel like there's a subtle difference. To me, actually, China really felt like sort of a slightly more futuristic version of America. Like, it felt like a very similar culture in some ways. There's a lot of sort of that sort of self-improvement thing. People like lots of ads with which you could translate with your phone with your phone that we're talking about, like, become richer, become smarter, very there are lots of like consumerism and sort of self-motive and sort of uh it seemed like there was a lot of individualism and individually targeted sort of goods and services and sort of narratives in China as well. Like it didn't seem like a super traditionalist society at all to me.
mm.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously it's rapidly changing at all
yeah.
times. I've never been to China where I wasn't warmly welcomed because we have a lot of connections there. Um, but when I was in Taiwan, I didn't have those connections. But people were always scooping me up. They were always, and it might have to do with me being a young woman at that time. Um, but in general, yes, both places are definitely worth visiting. I want to go to some questions. I just want to make sure I'm getting. I mean, we still have I think we were going to aim for an hour here. We have maybe 15 minutes left. But
Sure.
Sharon Home has asked about any interactions that you had with any scientists there or any researchers there. I didn't pick up that from your articles.
Well,
Um,
actually, before I went for about a year, I emailed tons and tons of people, I think close to
oh,
20 people doing interesting work, trying to see if I could get an interview with them as I'd done when I
mm,
visited. Yeah, and not one of them responded actually, which
oh,
is maybe telling in itself. There might have been some directive like don't give interviews to American media. It might have just been a thing that people were not encouraged to do in China right now. It is still an authoritarian country.
right.
So basically all the stuff I saw was publicly visible stuff, publicly visible infrastructure, stuff like the high speed rail networks, or
Mm,
as things you mentioned, I did a little just online detective work to find the testing site in Guangzhou for the electric flying car company, the one doing the giant sort of people carrying driverless drones. So basically, I did not have a lot of like one-on-one interviews, but I sort of got to go to a lot of sites when interesting work was being done, just hang out with other people there. I had a great experience hiking with a local hiking group on the Great Wall, which with at a point which had a great view of the super great, a guy called Huang Wei. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Tell me about fire off some electric vehicle stats.
Okay. Most cars being sold in China now, and China is the world's largest car market. Most cars being sold in China now are electric vehicles. It crossed that 50% line in 2025. And it's actually like something like 25% of trucks, like heavy duty trucks, like 18 wheelers, not pickup trucks, are electric vehicles as well now in China, which is happening really fast, much faster than most people predicted. And they've actually set up on many key routes between cities networks of like fast automatic battery swapping stations, so that trucks carrying goods don't have to wait to charge, so that you can pop in a fresh battery and then the battery they just used up charges in mail for the next truck. There's um there's just incredibly rapid electrification of transport in all the Chinese cities I went to: Beijing, Chengdu, Chongqing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. Electric vehicles were most of the cars on the road. And, these are cities, so they're probably higher income areas. That probably looks different in some other areas. Kind of like trying to judge America by going to like New York City, Washington, D.C., Denver, and San Francisco. Like you're getting a skewed like percentage of the country. But lots and lots of electric vehicles. And you could really tell which ones were electric vehicles too, because in China, electric vehicles have a green license plate background.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so
And are they like dinky cars? Or are they like,
they're futuristic cars. They are cars they'll call it. Look, China has rapidly scaled up its auto manufacturing in the last 10 years, as well as most other kinds of manufacturing, really. And they're now kind of at the cutting edge of car technology. Like, they'll the Ford CEO has said, like, the CEO of Ford, the Ford Motor Company in the US, has said, "Yeah, China's making better cars than anything Ford can make right now." He said that publicly. Like, "When I got a Xiaomi car, I didn't want to give it back. We got to up our game." And there was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal recently saying basically, "Oh my god, this Chinese car is way better than anything I can get in America." And, yeah, a lot of heavy investment in a bunch of related sort of electrotech industries like smartphones, the battery packs, that whole sort of overlapping Venn diagram of modern technology has really positioned China well for electric vehicles because, an electric car is in many ways a smartphone on wheels. It's got a battery, it's got lots of software. A lot of major smartphone makers have directly transitioned to making electric cars. So, like, again, like Xiaomi. And
and
yeah,
uh, are they selling electric cars outside of China? You talk about BYD a lot, that brand.
Yeah, BYD is the leading electric vehicle company in the world right now. They overtook Tesla a couple years ago. And, just, Chinese electric vehicles made up more than 1 in 10 of all cars sold in the European Union last year. That's not
Mhm.
1 in 10 of all electric vehicles sold in the European Union. Chinese electric vehicles made up more than 1 in 10 of all new cars sold in the European Union last year. I live in Paris because I was incredibly lucky to get married to the love of my life, who was a French woman recently. There's a BYD dealership a couple streets away. Like,
Yeah.
when most of the world wants to buy cool future technology now, they're buying from China. And America, I don't think has really understood that yet. And, like,
Why can't we buy a BYD here in America?
because it's effectively illegal, there's something like there's, like, a bunch of stacking tariffs that make it economically non-competitive, and then also you're not allowed to register a BYD or any Chinese EV with an American insurance company or import it to an American port or a bunch of other things. It is in practice not allowed for a number of reasons. And
Right,
BYD actually just sued the American government in the U.S. Court of Trade Disputes over that. But
right. Because
like,
how much would a BYD, a very nice BYD car cost here?
well, here it would cost more than in China because but Canada, for example, just this last month signed a deal to let some Chinese EVs into Canada. And, like, it and an exported BYD would be solidly in, like, the 20,000 to 30,000 US dollar range for a model like the Dolphin. Um, but like, I think the average price of a new car made in the US is now over $50,000.
Right.
So, and in
Plus the
China,
gas that you have to pay for.
of $10,000. Yeah, like, affordability has become justifiably a buzzword in American politics. Electrification is affordability. Like, like, there's this, like, Bill McKibben had a great sentence about this, like, people think renewable energy is like the Whole Foods of technology, like this fancy bougie thing, and it kinda was in 2005, but now renewable energy is the Costco or the Walmart of technology. It's the thing where you get cheap mass production that is just a reasonably high quality good for way cheaper than anything else you can get.
I
And,
love it.
just the cost of living in the United States is somewhat artificially inflated in so many ways by this sort of forced dependence on fossil fuels. Someone in Canada or Mexico or France or Pakistan if can now get a better car for less money than someone in the United States.
So what has that done for China's air quality? And that's not the only thing that's
Yeah.
improving air quality, but uh,
Yeah. And yeah, what that was one thing that really struck me. Like, when I was a kid getting into environmental issues, China's air quality was deservedly known as the worst in the world. Like, in 2014, barely um barely like 13 years ago, in January 2014, so almost exactly 13 years ago, Beijing had what was called an air apocalypse, like hazardous levels for like particulate matter pollution are generally considered to get really hazardous around like 100, They were past like 750. They were off the scale bad. They were like kids couldn't go to school. Like it was
wildfire, we call it wildfire air here in California
uh,
every day.
wildfire air every day, no escape. and it was just absolutely terrible. And when I went to Beijing, it felt like Paris. It felt like New York, maybe even a little cleaner. There was
Mhm.
blue skies, no smog, tons of EVs in the street, and that's just a really impressive turnaround in the past. In the past, like less than a decade and a half, and the statistics on this are really impressive as well. Let me just pull them up. Um, and this also just really shows what we can do when we try. Like the U.S. also has had periods of rapid reduction in pollution, like after the passage of the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act in the 70s and 80s, and um I'm just pulling this up. Yeah, like total particulate matter pollution across China has declined by 41% from 2014 to 2022. And Beijing, it's declined by 54.1%, which, if sustained, equates to the average Beijing resident living 3.9 years longer.
Yeah.
And like lots of people got really horrible lung damage during the age of heavy fossil fuel air pollution, as has happened in many countries at that stage of development. But Chinese kids growing up today are not getting anywhere near as bad air. So there's just a huge range of escalating sort of ripple effects of positive stuff just from using this technology. And it's not
It
even just
makes me think, they are concerned about their population declining right now, but
it's
you can
happening
also
fast. Yeah. China,
a great thing to keep your population productive is to keep them healthy and
yeah,
alive. So
that's true, yeah. And like air quality in China on average, I believe, is still worse than the US, but they've come a very, very, very long way in a very short space of time.
and is that, is that, EVs? Is it, cutting out coal? I know they're still using a lot of coal and possibly building coal plants, but what has been the key reason for that?
Well, a bunch of related things. EVs have helped. There used to be a bunch of regions in China that would just burn coal like firewood just to heat homes as like a basic
Yeah.
heating source. That's been essentially banned. There's been attempts to put like some basic sort of squabbles and pollution controls of the sort that will really became common in the US after the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments on Chinese coal plants and gas plants. A range of things moving a range of causes that have improved air quality in China in the last like 15 years.
Yeah.
And
Well, it makes me think of, when I was there, street vendors, if you just wanted to get a little donut that was fried in a vat of oil,
yeah,
they'd have this a round brick of coal underneath their, and that's everybody along the whole street would have those. And, you know, we were breathing that. And they were,
I ate
uh,
at a lot of street vendors, but I never saw anyone burning coal. Yeah,
you didn't. Okay.
yeah.
Right. um, Tell me, do we have what we've got we've got 3 minutes left. We don't have to stick to it. I mean, we can sit here talking forever. I would
I can
love
keep
to
going.
talk
Yeah. Like I have a hard in like 33 minutes for another meeting, but I am down to keep talking past an hour if you want. And especially for
well,
like I've probably been talking too much. Um
not
I
at all. No, Sam, we all love you. If we're
yeah.
here, we are like, we want some of this enthusiasm that you have. We wanna hear it, you know? Um,
But
we
But fundamentally, what's happening in China will happen other places too, just slower.
right,
This is fundamentally really good news for humanity because it's showing what can be done. Like, no matter what your views are on the British Empire, if you live in the 1830s, if you go look at the steam locomotive there, you're like, okay, wow, this is probably happening. This is probably going to change a lot. This is way faster than a horse.
right.
If you no matter what your views are on America in the 1950s, if you go there and look at the mass production of consumer goods like cars, TVs, electronics, the space program, you're probably looking like, wow, okay, stuff's happening in this country. Probably the stuff happening in America is probably going to start to happen in the rest of the world. And um, kind of the entire world except the US and a couple other fossil fuel focused states are really doubling down on investing in clean energy right now. And it is just increasingly clear that even if you don't care at all about climate change, even if you don't care at all about the environment, it is just the smart thing to do. It will save you money, make your country less dependent on imports, clean your local air, and just make life better.
Yeah. I do wanna touch on biodiversity before we sign off. Let's go for, a few more minutes. I was, really surprised to learn that China was building out these national parks, protecting green areas. Obviously, it's doing a ton of regreening, reforestation in the desert. That also is also related to Beijing's air quality when they would have dust storms from there. So there's a huge effort to control that. Um, I've just l- had so much exposure to pandas. My nickname at one point was Amanda Panda. So I didn't know, I had kind of tuned out giant panda conservation for a while until I read your story. Um, just how much success there's been on that front. But I wanted to point out, I did point out in a recent note on Substack that they are taking an entirely different approach to protecting these areas than the United States did. They're not taking the approach of evicting people. And I'm very curious how that will play out. And, one of my fundamental beliefs is that people are a part of ecosystems, especially the ones that know them well and care about them and are the local people. So I'm really curious. You don't wanna take those people out of the
Yeah.
picture, you wanna engage them and bring them in, and we know all across the world that that actually, creates, more successful outcomes when local and communities are involved. Tell us a little bit about what you observed there in terms of, the national park you visited, the pandas, and how it's being connected with all these other parks. There's this continuity happening?
There's a bunch of fascinating work going on. I sadly, my time in China was very limited at this point. There was only a 10-day visa-free period which recently opened for Americans, so I wasn't able to really get into, like, wild areas like I wanted to. I went to a sort of smaller local park, near Beijing that had a great hike on a wild part of the Great Wall overlooking the grid and a bunch of other interesting stuff. And in Chengdu, like you said, I visited the sort of the global center of giant panda conservation, sort of Chengdu Panda Base that's devoted to sort of the research and breeding of giant pandas. And there's a lot of history there. And like, but like one thing you said is people were super invested. Chengdu's a huge city, like 20 million plus people, the size of New York City. And throughout the city, miles away from the panda center, there's panda branded everything. Like like, much more than there is in the rest of China. Like there's people are proud that this is the city of pandas with the panda resource base that you can go on a day trip to a national park where you might see pandas. It had that sort of vibe that you often see in like places like Bar Harbor, Maine, or um, Lake Tahoe, where like there's sort of a community investment in conservation because people are proud that there's like a natural wonder around here. And
Yeah.
uh, and like you said, yeah, getting people invested in conservation where they live is the long term sort of social sustainability way to make that happen. And like the panda numbers have sort of eked up slowly but consistently for the last couple decades. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature now actually ranks them as vulnerable, not endangered. So like the iconic endangered species is no longer officially endangered, which is really quite impressive.
Like,
Um,
underscore that. Pandas are not endangered anymore.
And, they're officially like the category above endangered or below, depending on which one category safer than endangered, vulnerable. But I actually think they might be one of the least endangered species in the world. I think that like based on the amount of investment in pandas there has been in China, because like the panda research base is like it has, like, conservation-focused areas and also, like, panda-themed amusement parks and rides and vendors. It's Panda Disneyland. It's one of the top tourist sites in China comparable to American Disneyland in visitor numbers. Um, and there's panda diplomacy, there's panda as a symbol of a nation,
Yeah.
there's so many other
Yeah, yeah.
things. I suspect that this is a functionally unlimited budget to keep pandas from going extinct. Like, like I suspect that there is a like there are like Chinese internet fandoms around specific celebrity pandas. There are conspiracy theories about foreign countries abusing the pandas in their zoos. Like pandas are huge. They're big business. They are too big
Yeah,
to fail. And like,
yeah. Big
um,
difference. I like
yeah,
that.
they are. And and getting yoked to a big, powerful country like that is a weird new sort of survival niche for a wild animal in the Anthropocene. And
Yeah.
I suspect that panda conservation will continue to receive a lot of support for the foreseeable future.
One thing that I, found that I learned from your article that I
Yeah.
really loved is that they allow the females to wander in the wild for a few months now, and it's been one of the challenges really in captive breeding was just like how do we get these ladies pregnant? They're only ovulating 36 hours per year. So somebody had this genius idea. I think they figured out how to do it in the breeding facility, but also they figured out that they can let them wander around in the wild and some they'll take care of it themselves out there and
Yeah,
come back and have babies.
bleeding. And yeah, pandas can be, like you said, have consistently been really hard to breed in captivity. And in early days of the program, they often resorted to some pretty draconian methods of artificial gamete collection and sort of not quite factory farming type techniques because pandas generally had pretty large enclosures, but um, some very forcible, non-natural methods of getting pandas to breed, which attracted controversy at the time. But lately, they have shifted substantially to a release into the wild for breeding and then recapture model, which has apparently been much more successful.
That's so fascinating to me, and I love, basically humans learning from their animal friends how to like, do things. There are some, um I would just say some people in the chat that, I think we already did our caveat in the middle of of this discussion, but there are people in the chat that are kind of raising some basically things that have been well covered in the media, just negative things that are going on in China. And just a reminder to the people listening and tuning in, both Sam and I, like we read and all kinds of news and we digest it, and we're not ignorant to any of that. But we're here to talk about the stuff that's undercovered that you don't hear about as often. And you should absolutely read everything that's going on and have a comprehensive view of China. We're just trying to highlight in this conversation the more positive, the very positive things that are going on environmentally.
Yeah, I absolutely condemn the horrible dictatorial stuff the Chinese Communist Party does, of which it does a lot. Guys bringing up like the Jimmy Lai affair, and other guys bringing up that huge dam project in Tibet for which Tibetans weren't consulted. Yeah, that they did bad stuff. Like I totally don't agree with that. I'm not trying to be a Chinese propagandist. I'm trying to point out that they're building a lot of really impressive stuff that is kind of at the leading edge of what humanity's building right now in a lot of categories. And and it's important to sort of not go, well, because they do bad stuff over here, we can ignore the good stuff they're doing over there, or even worse, think, well, it must not be good after all if they're the ones doing it. Um, but like, but uh, but like, uh, but like you said, the world is a very, very big place, and it has lots of good and lots of evil at the same time. And by population, China's 1/7 of the world, and it has lots of good and lots of evil and lots of evil at the same time. And someone just put in the chat, one comes with the other, and no, it really doesn't. Like we absolutely could have had this level of technology in America if we'd had slightly more functional politics in the last 3 decades. A lot of countries across Europe, Latin America, or functioning democracies. One might argue better. One might argue more functioning than the U.S. at this time that are building out tons and tons of clean energy on the Chinese model. This is absolutely something America could have had, and I personally think a couple tweaks to permitting review and science and research funding, and not having a political party completely under the thumb of fossil fuels, a couple like contingent, relatively small changes to the American political system. This could have been us 40 years ago. Like, like I think that this is not some outgrowth of the political system. I just think that they were the ones who were in sort of the manufacturing sort of development track at the right time and didn't have access to domestic fossil fuels, which was huge. They don't want to rely on imports, and they were the ones who seized this opportunity. But this opportunity was lying on the table. Like all of this amazing like clean energy technology and stuff. Anyone can do this. That's what I'm trying to say here.
I don't know if you see there's hearts flying
Yeah,
off right here. I didn't know that it could do that, but there's a lot of people
yeah,
liking what you're saying. So I want to, since we talked about flying cars and we didn't actually talk about, we mentioned it. It seems like people want to hear about the flying cars, and then we'll wrap up soon.
okay, so on January 27th in Guangzhou, China, I saw a flying car. And it was really, really impressive. It looked unreal. It looked like an item from a superhero movie or a video game or something just sitting there in the sky. even very small drones now have automatic gyro stabilizers now, so you can just sort of leave them in the sky, and it looks like they're on an invisible shelf. It's crazy. It's like perfect stability. But the point is, it was this giant sort of octocopter drone, like a quadcopter, but with 8 rotors, and it had 2 seats, no driver, a driverless flying car, and it was by this company Ehang that's making electric driverless flying cars that are just currently scaling up and being made, and uh starting to take jobs from firefighting in Beijing to they've done trial flights in Spain and Mexico. Like this is like we are America's kind of already not adapting to Chinese electric cars. I really hope we get our act together in time to maybe do something to at least stay somewhat in the race with Chinese electric flying cars, because battery technology, like all of this comes down to battery technology, really, because like one classic statement is our entire energy infrastructure has been built around two molecules, hydrogen and carbon, hydrocarbons, and now with batteries, we're exploring the entire rest of the periodic table. Like it's not an individual thing that you dig up and mine. It's a concept. It's ways of organizing matter that make electricity do stuff for you. And there's just millions of possibilities that we're just beginning to explore. And right now we have battery powered electric flying cars. And like we're just starting the electrotech age. And that is that is going to be just such a huge thing for all of humanity. And right now, the best place to see the early shoots of that are in China, but I think that will change eventually. And I sort of salute the Chinese engineers that are leading this, um, and hope that the rest of the world, and especially the United States, will give this the priority it deserves, or at least get out of its way, politics wise.
Yeah.
Let their own clean energy development happen without attacking it politically.
You know, I think we'll wrap this up and I have one more question for you, burning question. I didn't prepare you for this, but I did want to ask you, w- w- where do you get this enthusiasm and this I call you a futurist, and I don't know if you call yourself an optimist, but I think that you agree that, and I agree that, humans basically created a lot of problems for themselves when they solved a lot of problems in the past 100 years.
Like
We're and
well, you solve problems, then solve the problems you created by solving the problems, and so on and so
yeah,
forth. Yeah,
but there, I think that we would agree that we believe that we can solve all the problems that we have.
absolutely.
And where does that come from in you? Like what was there anything that happened in your formative years? Anything that
I guess I was sort of a weird, precocious kid, learned to read early, read a lot of stuff early, and since I was very, very young, like 7, 8, I was really, really focused on climate change. I read, An Inconvenient Truth, Our Choice, the early Al Gore works on that, and a bunch of associated scientific and sort of popular science literature. And so as a little kid, I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like renewable energy is not economically competitive. We're on track for like ICP 8.5, the world's warming pathway. Civilization might fall in my lifetime due to climate change. This is apocalyptically bad. And in 2005, that was in fact the appropriate way to look at the data. Like we were just burning more and more coal every year. Renewable energy was not cost competitive. It did look like we were just driving off a cliff. And like bit by bit, as I've grown to sort of adulthood, over a period where I think most people have gotten much more concerned about climate change, we've started to see the effects. I've been like, oh my God, we're actually going to make it, because renewable energy has stepped up and been developed to the point where solar is the cheapest source of electricity in world history, and it's renewable energy is over 80% of all new electricity capacity being built worldwide, and like big chunks of South Asia and Africa are on track to leapfrog the entire fossil fuel age. Like there was some incredibly positive stuff happening that would have seemed utterly utopian just like 20 years ago when I was a little kid. And, it just gets sort of everything becomes normal, right? That's the great thing and the terrible thing about humanity. We have one scale and we shrink or grow our experiences to fit. And but like I've seen by obsessively following it every week for years just how much progress has already been made. And and that gives me a great deal of I think data driven hope for the future.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna one. I was wondering if you would even use the word hope because I feel like you're beyond hope. You just know it. You just know we're gonna do it. So I just want to really thank you for joining us today. I want to thank everybody who joined and all the questions. And I personally just want to thank everyone who is a subscriber to both our newsletters because you're actually part of this hope and this solution and this driving this information to more and more readers. And we have to get the information out there. Good things are happening. We have to keep on letting people know. And all these people, don't you agree, are part of that. They're part of the momentum.
And it's uneven and it's messy, and every government that does something we like probably also does something truly evil that we detest. But there are good things happening, incredibly good things, things that would have seemed like utopian climate scientist fan fiction 20 years ago. And it's important not to let that slide. Problems can get resolved. Amazing, amazing improvements in the quality of human life and the balance between humanity and our biosphere are not just possible, but happening.
Yeah. Okay, and if you want to see Sam interview people, be sure to subscribe to his daily dose of climate hope. Anything else you want to promote, like the monthly calls that you're doing? I mean, Hannah Ritchie, wow, what a scoop!
That's, yeah.
Um, you go, this is real. Do you actually have a visceral change of perspective after watching these? And I try to attend as many of those as I can. Do you want to dump something in the chat about how people can join
Sure.
those?
Yeah.
Those are really on Eventbrite with the Climate Hope folks.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm just putting the link to the previous monthly doses of Climate Hope, and generally we advertise the upcoming ones in the daily dose of Climate Hope on Substack.
Very good, very good.
Thank you so much.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Absolutely. Substack lives are fun, and they unlike and you can just sort of do them live. So yeah, absolutely. When you have something else you want to discuss, I am totally open to this. This is my full Substack live, so I am enjoying the process of finding this out.
Well, we have to figure out how to share screens. So
Yeah,
somebody in the chat knows how, and so reach out to me later and tell me how do we share screen because Sam is a very data driven, chart driven guy. I usually can follow it helps to be able to follow with sharing screens. And yeah, people do this all the time on Substack. It sends out a notification. They can be a little bit irritating and they can kind of hog your screen if you don't want to see them. But I'm really glad to see the engagement that we had today. I have no idea how many people joined, but it looked like a lot. Um, and
and
do we do this like on a regular basis, Sam?
maybe, yeah. I mean, I feel like we should sort of do it like in response to stuff, like in response to like specific topics, because I've said like the next one shouldn't be about China, for example. We just so yeah,
We can talk about the US. We kind of badgered the US in this conversation, or even California, but there's so much good
there's
stuff going
incredible
on.
stuff happening too.
Um,
One really unreported great thing that happened in the U.S. was that in the government funding package, it funded most of the government except DHS that contains the psychotic secret police murdering people. Um, in the sort of compromised government funding package, a lot of the White House's proposed cuts to really critical organizations like NASA and the NSF were rejected by Congress. So, like late last year, we were getting headlines like American science will be completely bereft of funding. And that's what the White House wanted, but Congress said no. And good old fashioned, backroom negotiation politics meant that we dodged some bullets that would have made the situation much worse in the US. And, it's hard to cheer for that when there's other bad stuff happening, but like sometimes scary stuff that bad people try to do doesn't happen. Sometimes you push back and you succeed and you protect and you build on that. And
yeah.
that's
Oh yeah. I'm a huge believer in well, to for lack of a better word, Chinese philosophy and how the universe works in cycles. It isn't ever a linear trajectory. So there's these pendulums that swing, especially in politics. There's, when you go to one extreme, there's pushback and it's going to come back. Jeff Frost says, who else is making progress? Let's hear about that. I mean, I think of Pakistan, India, Africa. There's so many. stories. We can't list them all here. I mean, we're doing
Little toy. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do on a regular basis. I wrote a whole article just collecting some of the amazing things Australia's doing recently. Just put it in the chat.
Australia, incredible.
Africa. The amazing stuff's happening around the world.
Australia has so much. Oh, for the next one, thank you, Jeff. Australia has so much solar power that it's free for like
Yeah,
hours and hours a day.
3 hours of free power per day for everyone. Yeah, like
So
the
if we get batteries and batteries, it's all about. I mean, literally, we're gonna save the world with batteries and e-bikes. That's my personal like feeling right now. Uh, get batteries deployed, suck up all the solar power we can during the day, solar and wind, and my battery works every single night. It runs my house. Just a two-panel system, and it runs my house for hours at night. It's only if we run the dishwasher or the washing machine. But yes, we should brainstorm on what else we could talk about. If people really like this, then we could just hop on Substack Live every once in a while,
you
talk
know
about things.
we can do one about your plug-in solar system because that's happening super fast. That's super topical. We should like
Yeah.
set.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is if it's on your roof or your balcony or whatever, but you should like set up with a smartphone or something literally right in front of it and walk people through how it works in your house. We should do that. I would love to do that. And I could chat you.
Oh,
Let's do
that's a
that.
great idea. I was gonna write a story where I do the snapshots of everything,
Do
but
this.
just
Do
walk
it.
around my house, that would be great, and do it live.
Do
Um,
them. Do them both. Write the story and do this. Like I wrote the China thing, and now I'm doing a live discussion of China. Do them both.
okay, very good. So the sun dipped in the sky since I installed it October 17th. The sun got lower. There's been a little more shade, and we're in winter and rainy season. But I have in California, 80% of the days are sun, so we have a ton of sun, even with those dynamics. So I've checked my app. I'm obsessed with it. I look at my app and I look and I do the math and I'm like, if I got this much sun every day, I would pay off these panels like in 2 years, but that's not the case, and that's only, I've been waiting basically until March, April to see like what is the maximum that these two panels can put out on a super warm, really nice long day without anything. And I think it might, I am going to guess that it might be 5 kilowatt hours. I'm not really great on the I want to see, I'm not great on the how to communicate these electricity numbers, but it might produce that much in one day.
And like full scale, and like for context, I've written a lot about plug-in solo. You are one of the plug-in solo outlaws doing it even before it's permitted in your state, which is awesome.
And technically, it's not illegal. There's no law that says you cannot plug in a solar because they just don't have any idea what it is.
Yes. Yeah. There's no
But
legal
I'm a
tax.
little covert, yes.
It's not being sold because it's not explicitly permitted to be sold. You got it through the Bright Saver group, which is incredibly awesome, I believe. Oh, did you? Did you get it? Did you get
Yes, I got it from
it?
Bright Saver. I learned about them from you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
they happen to be, well, I'm not good. I try not to say where I live because it's just so, I don't know, divisive. I live in San Francisco Bay Area, and look, we're going to have a solar powered law. We're going to have this is going to get legalized this year, explicitly legalized this year because
This
we've
bill's
got
in 25 states
the
for
bill
this
is
now.
proposed. What's
Yeah.
that?
This bill's in 25 states to formally legalize plug-in solar in America now. 25 states. And it actually just passed like the Vermont Senate and Virginia House like this last week.
Right. And a lot of that is Bright Saver. So we need to get Bright Saver, why aren't they on CNN? Why aren't they,
Yeah.
there's just so much bad to focus on. And there's just one guy stealing the headlines every day, 10 headlines a day above the fold. Who could have conceived that entire newspapers would devote? And, I worked for newspapers for a long time. You shouldn't repeat the same word from one headline to the next. That also bores readers. But, the
I,
state of newspapers and websites right now with just
and
one word being repeated over and over again.
and
Um,
one like you say is like in the 1680s, like Louis the 14th of France, if there had been online news, he would have been in all the headlines all the time. Like he was constantly doing dramatic stuff, starting wars with the Netherlands, like swifting mistresses, like building a huge gaudy court at Versailles, like he would have been absolute main character on social media every day, all day, if there had been social media in the 1680s. But you know what? And like in the 1680s, it was the affair des poisons, where like something like 50 people were arrested at Versailles for poisoning each other and a bunch of other people. There was huge drama, political drama, horror in high places, very reminiscent of today in some ways. But you know what? Something way more important than any of that in the 1680s was that a random Dutch lens maker was messing around with shaped glass and became the first human being to see microbial life. Anthony van Leeuwenhoek in the Netherlands, and
Right.
the and like in Britain, a bunch of total weirdos who the king was funding for some reason were starting to talk about stuff like the scientific method in the Royal Society, and like in the 1680s. These weird sideshows at the time that would have seemed like totally inconvenient compared to the big dramatic golden guy doing evil stuff in the court actually turned out to be the things that shaped the modern world and that had a long-term impact. And I think that stuff like plug-in solar and battery technology is like that today. It's the stuff that will really matter long after individual evil people are gone.
Brightsaver.org, folks.
Yeah,
Brightsaver.org. They're coming to a legislature near you.
absolutely.
And
Yeah, I've written entire petitions you could share with your state legislator on that.
yeah,
Um, Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of a nice transition into sort of the next potential discussion we have. I've actually just invited Kevin Cho from White Table to be the next monthly dose headliner as well. So this is a nice like trailer for coming
very
attraction.
good. Very good. Because
Yeah.
there's so much to talk about. There's so much. But we're going to conclude
We'll have to
today.
have a meeting in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, great. You have your limitation with, yeah, with your climate hope
Yeah.
folks. Very good.
But hey, it has been amazing, Amanda.
Yeah.
hope I haven't talked over you too much. I have since very small childhood, I have a tendency to talk too much, and I I
We
sometimes
all
joke that I
do.
started fighting because I couldn't possibly monologue at one person to say all the things I wanted to say. So I just got to put it out there so that people can read it at their leisure and not have to listen.
Yeah.
but 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 anyway, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff is happening in the world, despite the parade of terrible things in the news. And you rock, Amanda. Thanks for doing this walk.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. High fives.
Thank you. Bye.
Good evening.
Live long and prosper. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.